today to have someone who has been successful in passing a transportation funding package, and hopefully we can learn some lessons about how to put together a campaign that's effective and get funding passed. So, Robert Latham is with the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. He's been there since 2001 when he assumed the position of Executive Vice President and Chief Staff Officer. He is a native of Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, and he's worked for a number of associations involved in transportation. He was the Executive Director and Chief Spokesman for the Marylanders for Efficient and Safe Highways, another coalition organization. And he also worked as a Managing Director for ARTBA, the American Road and Transportation Builders Association. So he has a wealth of experience, over 20 years of experience in doing this kind of work. And we're really excited to hear from him how he was successful in Pennsylvania in getting some very significant funding increases. So please join me in welcoming Robert Latham.
Well, obviously I can't come up here and talk about transportation without mentioning last night. I had an opportunity to get in here a little bit early and spent the evening in my room at the Marriott Courtyard out in Eden Prairie, probably like everybody here, watching the election results and wondering, what does this all mean? All personal things aside, I have to agree with the Senator's assessment that I think it's very positive for our industry, for our issue, as we refer to it, at the national level, because of a couple of things. And Margaret mentioned that I used to work for ARTBA or ARTBA back in the 1980s. We had a government relations guy there by the name of Frank Dooley, Francis Xavier Dooley. Frank was as Irish as his name sounds, premature white hair, red face. He looked like Tip O'Neill, probably because he was from Boston. In fact, he was part of the O'Neill machine. Well, every morning, or every Monday morning, Frank would give us a sort of a rundown of what was going on in the Hill, what we were looking at. You know, he was up talking to then Bud Schuster and Jim Howard, and these are names many of you probably don't know, but that 20 years is actually a lot longer. Anyway, and he would say at the end of it, well, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. And those of us who were young and full of vinegar and other things thought, why don't we make something happen? But, you know, what you learned was in Congress sometimes you just have to wait and see what will happen. I agree with the Senator's comment about Donald Trump. I didn't see his acceptance speech, but the one thing I do remember from the campaign was a moment at one of the early debates, the Republican debates, when Trump started talking about infrastructure, rebuilding our roads and bridges, and we spend money rebuilding other countries, and we're not building our own infrastructure here, and we really need to spend money doing that. And Carly Farina looked at him and said, "You sound more like a Democrat than a Republican." And that was an aha moment for me because, you know, as a political junkie or whatever, I follow these things. I actually watch, you know, the primary debates and things like that. And I turned to my wife and I said, you know, I've never heard a presidential candidate mention transportation before. Not even mention it. I mean, that I can remember, going all the way back to, you know, to 2000, you know, with George Bush. I said, that's really something. At least somebody's talking about it. And that's going to have a little bit of relevance to what I talk about here with what we did in Pennsylvania. But just to close this out, I think there's a different dynamic now. You have a situation now where you have a Republican president, a Republican Congress, and a Republican Senate, and a Republican House. We have not had that for 8 years. Actually, even at the end of the Bush administration, if you recall, the House was controlled by the Democrats. So the politics of it for 16 years have been President Bush not really a big supporter of increasing revenues of some sort other than through public-private partnerships or some sort of privatization. Never went anywhere in Congress. And then the last 8 years, President Obama had some good ideas that he threw out, but they were DOA when they got to Congress. Now you have a situation, perhaps, where you have a president that is interested in infrastructure, and maybe he'll be able to work with Congress, and maybe because there isn't this partisanship there. So I think there's some reason for optimism on our issue at the national level as a result of that. I'm going to talk a little bit today about our program in Pennsylvania. Margaret mentioned the fact that since 2013, there have been some 7 or 8 states that have passed their gas tax increase or transportation funding bill. We passed ours in 2013 in the fall and was signed in the winter of 2013 in Pennsylvania. So prior to that, 0. None. And honestly, everybody was really kind of struggling on how to message this issue, how to get this thing over the top. And I'm going to tell you basically how we got there, what we did, what worked in Pennsylvania. Hopefully maybe you can take some of these things and see whether they are applicable here in Minnesota or not. And maybe there's some things that will work for you. Since 2013, I've done a number of things in addition to following up with our legislature at home and doing some other things like that. I was out to Utah in 2014 and testified before their General Assembly, worked with their Chamber of Commerce, which was sort of the lead group out there. They then subsequently passed some legislation. We also did some work in Arizona, helping them. They recently got an initiative, ballot initiative passed. So it's really one of the great things about having been one of the first to pass this. I got an opportunity to travel around and visit with folks and really learn more about what's going on around the country. It is a great country we have. It's wonderful to get out of Pennsylvania and see what's going on in other states and meet other people like you. So I'm really pleased to be here. This is the Harrisburg, the state capital in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. When Margaret mentioned I grew up in Camp Hill, that's right across the river from Harrisburg. So I'm local to the area. I was interested in politics at an early age. June 30th, 2013, I don't know about here, but it's hot, and it's humid and it's muggy. June 30th of that year was a Sunday, and the legislature is not usually in session on Sunday, but they were in session this weekend. We have a constitution that says we're supposed to pass the budget by June 30th. We usually make it, sometimes we don't. This was a Sunday that, unlike other Sundays, I got up, put my suit on, and went to work. We had an 11 o'clock conference call scheduled with all of our advocates to give an update as to where we were on the funding bill, which was really at the break point at that point. It was go or no go. And there had been a lot of furious back and forth over the last week or so. This was a bill that we had been working on for 5 years. 5 years. We started in 2008. And we had finally come to the culmination where we were going to pass the bill. We were walking up the steps that you see there, kind of about the point where those people are. This is obviously a stock photo, but about where those people are, we met up with one of our colleagues who said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "What do you mean, what am I doing here?" So we're here to see, what's going on for the day. I said, "Well, you didn't hear. They adjourned at 2 o'clock, passed the budget, and didn't do the transportation bill. We're done." Oh. So the only thought I had was, all right, now I get to go back and tell about 100 people on a conference call what he just told me. And the question, of course, is going to be, where do we go from here? So that's what we call a lose-win. And you might ask, well, why did you feel like that was a win at any level? Why did you feel confident? And why did you feel good when you went back? Because we had a very strong messaging program that we had put together. We had a totally committed, focused, and aligned advocacy group. And we knew that because our original package, we were going for a $2.5 billion funding increase with dedicated portions for PennDOT, or state roads, local roads, public transit, and also multimodal, locks, dams. We actually have 2 ports in Pennsylvania, Erie and Philadelphia. And we also have a river system out in western Pennsylvania. So we had a whole package put together there. The week before, PennDOT secretary came to us and said, look, we got a deal from the speaker. He's willing to do $1.8 billion, but the transit portion and everything else is out. And we said no. We weren't going to leave anybody behind. We had gone into this as a group. We were all committed to a comprehensive bill, and we literally said, no thank you. It's going to be all or nothing. Starting point, July 2008. Well, where were we at that point? You may recognize one of the guys in this picture. I'm not sure if you do or not. Anybody? The guy on the left is Ed Rendell, of course. The guy on the right is the president of our association, Mike Halo. He's from Clarion, Pennsylvania. We had a meeting with the governor in our office, and he came in to talk about what his plan for transportation is. He would go on, Ed Rendell would go on to write this book later on, and he's a great spokesman for transportation. He gets paid a lot more to make speeches than I do. But does anybody out there know the story behind this book? Anybody know? There was a football game that was played in Philadelphia. And Ed Rendell's passion, my passion is golf, by the way, which I'm floored. Is this normal weather for November here in Minnesota? Yes. Because I'm a big golfer, and I love to go to places, and if I have an opportunity, even try to get on famous courses. I think there's one nearby here. So when I was making my arrangements, I thought November. I got up this morning, it's going to be 60 degrees here. Anyway, Ed Rendell's, he's a big football sports nut. And what he used to do, when he was governor, he did sportscasting. He was the color guy for the Eagles. So they were supposed to play a game that day, and it started to snow. And the NFL canceled the game. And he went nuts. And he said, we've turned into a nation of whistles. Why would we ever do this? Anybody know who was supposed to play? Minnesota Vikings. Would you have canceled a game for snow out here? I don't think so. Anyway, well, the Eagles. They had a quarterback that do that now. Anyway, so we had this meeting with the governor. That's me, looking a lot younger. To the governor's right is our Secretary of Transportation. When we're scheduled to meet with the Secretary of Transportation, he calls you up at 4 o'clock the day before and says, the governor wants to come to our meeting. You say, okay, the governor wants to come to our meeting. So anyway, we had a little bit of a tumultuous history with Governor Rendell. In 2005, he shifted about $430 million in flexible federal highway funds to public transit. That didn't sit well with the highway advocates, as you might imagine. In 2006, he advocated to lease the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which is a toll road that goes the length of Pennsylvania, in a similar fashion that the Indiana toll road was leased, and that blew up. And then finally, in 2007, they passed a borrowing scheme involving the Turnpike, which kind of bumped us along a little bit. So it was pretty clear that Governor Rendell was not in a mind to spend any political capital. He was a good speaker, and he went on, and he's a big cheerleader for transportation. But he wasn't going to do anything. And and that's when it hit us after that meeting. That's why I kind of featured that slide. It's one thing I kind of keep in front of me. What was the moment? What was the sort of that moment of clarity where we said, we're going to have to do something differently than we've been doing? It was that moment, that meeting, 2008. Rendell was going to be governor for 2 more years. And we knew at that point in time that we were not going to get anything done for the duration of his governorship. He would be term limited out in 2010. We would have a new governor. So what was our situation at the time? Well, it was clear that Rendell would not take the lead. We had a very conservative House of Representatives. The Senate leaders kept looking at us and saying, if you get the governor, we're on board. I used to call that the Wicked Witch of the West, move. In other words, bring me the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West and I'll grant your wish. They'll give you an impossible task to go for. We had no plan. We really didn't have any kind of, there was no basis for what we just know we needed more money in the program, but we didn't know why. We didn't know, we didn't have anything that we could point to. And our advocates were not focused and aligned. When I say they were not focused and aligned, at one point, we started I guess what is an ill-advised strategy, because after the governor flexed the highway money, we thought we would get, the people who were losing out on that highway money incensed about the loss of that money. So we started this program called the Other PA, because most of that highway money to public transit was all going to Philadelphia. So we tried to, we tried to raise awareness of this. It kind of backfired. All the legislators from those areas said, yeah, Bob, you stick it to the governor. The governor kind of showed us who's boss, and we dropped the program. So it really was key to us that we needed to sort of assess our organization's internals. Some of the fallout from the fight we had with the governor splashed back on me and our association, but not on others. So the reaction was from some of our other ancillary groups like, gee, it sucks to be you. So obviously we didn't have industry buy-in. We weren't really quite sure who our champions were, and we didn't have a strategy. Strategy. This is what, strategy is what, so what, and now what. What we were finding we were doing over time was looking at the what, okay, where are we? And then immediately going to now what? In other words, implement. We didn't really assess, we didn't really develop a strategy. We didn't do the background work that was needed in order to move the thing forward. So we went back, and we actually have a consultant, believe it or not, who is a strategy consultant. We worked with him, and I think that it helped move things quite along. So there were several organizational elements in that. One was researching relevant message, developing the active leadership, and building broad-based support. So we developed a 3-year strategy starting in 2008 through 2011. What we said was, what we felt was, we are not going to get this done while Rendell is governor. And as you all know, or at least in my experience over the years, is that you don't get a major transportation bill passed without the governor being on board. The legislature does not lead. They do not lead on an issue like this. The governor has to lead on an issue like this. So we decided to develop a strategy on that. So we put together a vision. What do we need? And this was literally the back of an envelope or a whiteboard thing. What if we, what would it take to take care of the needs for public transit in eastern Pennsylvania, for new roads in certain areas, for rehabilitating our bridges? We have a lot of bridges in Pennsylvania, by the way, 25,000 at the time. 5,000 of them were SD bridges, not good. But in any event, so we needed a lot of work. Local governments were stressed for money for their system, and there was no money to do anything else. We couldn't work on things like dirt and gravel roads. There was no money for our port system. There was no money for our locks and dams. So we had to kind of build out the ask. Then we researched the public response and message to it. We developed the ask, focused on the ask, and then developed a broad-based coalition. Again, the assessing your internals and your planning, looking at leadership, staff, funding, how do you pay for all of this, who's doing the lobbying. And we did a thorough examination of all this while developing our strategy going forward. Keeping affiliated industry organizations focused. I was driving to work one morning. Imagine this. What are some of the things that people think your opponents say on a bill like this? Well, they just waste money. There's plenty of money. You ever heard this line? We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. We spend too much money, they waste money. We need to do away with prevailing wages. We have, there's some other reason why, we ought to get rid of my favorite, waste, fraud, and abuse. So, I'm driving to work one day in the middle of this campaign, and I'm listening to the radio, and an ad comes on, and I can't really quote it, but let me just give you the flavor of it. It was an ad. We have a big cement industry in Pennsylvania, by the way, so this was and for those of you who are with the concrete industry, don't take this as an insult. The ad said basically the state is wasting a lot of money because they're using asphalt pavement on their roads. And so, it would be much more cost effective if the state would not waste their money on asphalt roads and use concrete because it's longer lasting. In the middle of a campaign, we are calling ourselves inefficient and costly. So we had to have a little discussion on that. Actually, what I did was I called their Secretary of Transportation and said, "Have you heard these ads?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, you better listen to this." He put a call into the concrete industry, and let's just say the ads would drop. But I don't mean to single out that this asphalt concrete fight has been going on forever, and it will. But the point is, not in the middle of a funding issue. We can't have that going on. So we have to have people focused in a line and working together on things. We created a rather extensive coalition. I know you have as well. I'm not going to dwell on it, but I will say this: in Pennsylvania, the support of the non-traditionals, as we call them. And who are the non-traditionals? These are the non-traditionals. Transit agencies, railroads, ports, AARP, the Heart Association, the bicycle people, labor. I have the Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce logo up there. I think it was really actually more helpful for us to have like the Johnstown Area Chamber of Commerce, or the Wilkes-Barre Chamber of Commerce, or the Hazleton Chamber of Commerce, or the Altoona, York. These are probably places that you've never heard of. Maybe you've heard of one or two of them in Pennsylvania. These are small towns, but as Margaret mentioned in some of the things that you're doing here, those areas, those local areas are really interested in road projects. They get it. They want to advocate for it. Some of these larger metropolitan chambers, they like it at the 30,000 foot level. But the grassroots is really effective, or it was for us anyways, by working with those small local chambers, because that's what really got to, particularly some of the rural and more conservative legislators. So, we've had enough of this for a while, but you have to assess your politics, and that was part of our strategy. We had to look at what is the makeup of the General Assembly. Where does transportation fit in the elections? I can tell you, in 2008, it was nowhere. And even when he was running, Rendell didn't talk about transportation. Nobody talked about transportation. It was a non-factor in elections. I spoke earlier about the presidential election. You didn't hear transportation mentioned in any presidential election. Where were political leaders on the issue? And what was Congress doing at the time? Because every once in a while we'd bring this up and say, well, Congress is going to do something soon, so let's just wait for them. Have you ever heard that here? So anyway, we had to look at that. So assessing our politics. Now I've got a group of slides here. There's probably only two people. Well, probably only two people on this slide that you recognize. Down in the lower left, former Speaker Boehner and Congressman Bill Schuster, who's the chairman of the House Infrastructure Committee. I put them up there in terms of our assessment of our politics because again, that was the battle cry that we kept hearing. Well, Congress is going to do something, so we don't really need to do anything. All of these gentlemen had an impact on this issue. On the upper left is a guy named Joe Huffle. Joe Huffle was a county commissioner from eastern Pennsylvania, very liberal. He wanted to run for governor. He had zero support. Nobody really paid much attention to Joe Huffle, but he had his hat in the ring and he was running. Next to him, atop, is Senate Pro Tem Joe Scarnati, and down below him, Dominic Pileggi. Dominic Pileggi was the one who we kept meeting with as the majority leader in the Senate, who said, get the governor and we'll be with you. Okay. The guy with the star over his head, you may recognize. At the time, he was at the zenith of his power nationally, Grover Norquist. Grover had a number of people in those time frames sign a no tax pledge, which included everything. In the upper right-hand corner is a gentleman by the name of Tom Corbett. Tom was the Republican candidate for governor. He was the current Attorney General. And he was the favored candidate by the Republican Party. And unfortunately, at some point along the way, he signed Grover Norquist's pledge. Down below him was even more, bottom right, even more conservative member of the House, and in the center there, Mike Turzai, a House leader, didn't want to have anything to do with taxes, etc. So we had to kind of pull all this together and say, all right, well, what do we do about all this? How do we get transportation to be part of the gubernatorial discussion? You know, we had gone through several cycles. Where's transportation? You know, you can see the polls. What are the issues people care about? Education, public safety, this, that. And down here, underneath the table is transportation. Nobody really cared about it. So the question is, what we were faced with was, how are we going to make this part of our program? And we came up with what we always call the Huffle strategy. You take a guy who wants to run for governor, who's willing to talk about your issue and needs you because nobody else is paying attention to him, and you fund him, you give him money, and you keep him going. And what happened here was, Joe was willing to make transportation his issue. What he did was he forced all the other candidates during debates to talk about transportation. Joe never caught fire, but he stayed in the race long enough. Joe's biggest issue was same-sex marriage. Now, I'm not here to talk about that issue, that's fine, but the point was in 2008, when you put that in front of a bunch of contractors, they said, this is the guy that we're going to back, and oh, by the way, he doesn't have any chance. So it was a little bit of convincing to do. We had another candidate on the Republican side by the name of Jim Gerlach. He was a congressman from eastern Pennsylvania, and he was on the T&I committee, and he was willing to talk about transportation as well. So he forced Tom Corbett to talk about it. The other part of our strategy was to work very closely with all of these gubernatorial candidates, make sure it was an issue, make sure we had people in the camp. And so when somebody won, we were able to work with them and make a suggestion as to who should be the Secretary of Transportation. When Tom Corbett was elected governor in 2010, he pledged to fix the transportation funding program in his first year. He also appointed as his Secretary of Transportation Barry Shope. Barry Shope at the time was the president of the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, which would be Pennsylvania's equivalent of the Minnesota Transportation Alliance. So we basically had one of ours now, and he's also an engineer with one of our major engineering firms. We have one of ours now as Secretary of Transportation. Barry's whole issue was getting funding for PennDOT, getting funding for transportation. So through working this 3-year strategy, we thought we had ourselves pretty well positioned. Next part of our strategy was, how do we message? Are we messaging properly? Obviously, if 1% of the public views transportation as an issue, somebody's not getting through to it. This is how we used to message before we got started on this program. We said to the public, we failed, so we need more money. Our system's bad, so we need more money, and you should pay. I mean, that was pretty much our message in Pennsylvania. It went something like this: we need more money to fix bad roads. This was a conversation, and the taxpayer said, "Sorry, we can't afford that this time." And it was reflected in the people that they elected. This was public education's conversation. We need more money to make sure no child is left behind, and the taxpayer says, "We can't afford to let that happen." And consequently, in Pennsylvania, K-12 education always got what they wanted. We thought that issue branding was very important. This is education's brand, or it was at the time. Success, smiling faces, off to college. How about this? This is our brand. I actually had people, in the late 2008 say, I don't want any more road work. It's a pain in the ass. It holds me up. I'm good. I have enough. I mean, it was hard. This was our brand. We're dirty. We pulled people up. So what we did was, we spent $250,000 on issue research, on messaging research. And the idea was, we needed to know how people felt about roads. How do you feel about roads? Internally. For years we had been messaging, we have 5,000 structurally defective bridges in Pennsylvania, and we need to fix them. So we wanted to get at the emotional and the visceral level through key findings and build an environment that legislators know they will not be punished at the polls. The public will never come out and say, "Hey, raise our gas tax, please." But what we were trying to do was build an environment where the public said, "It's okay to vote for us. We won't punish you." So what did the research show? That's another hour-long presentation on how we did this, but it was through polling, through focus groups, through internet research, et cetera, et cetera. It's very comprehensive. It boiled down to this: safety, convenience, and quality of life on local roads. Those were the messages that stuck in Pennsylvania in those days. So here it is: safe roads in all seasons for all of Pennsylvania, making my everyday life more manageable for me, my family, and my community. We did it in certain areas, and we did some television ads. I'm going to try to play one for you right now.
Our roads, bridges, and transit take us to where we need to be. Work, the grocery store, a son's ball game, a daughter's dance practice. But over the years, Pennsylvania hasn't had the resources to meet our transportation needs. And now we're suffering the consequences. Traffic is getting worse, and it's slowing us and our emergency responders down. Investing in our roads and bridges will ease congestion, improve safety, boost our economy, and improve our quality of life. So it's time we acted. Go to bettersaferroads.com for less traffic, safer roads, bridges, and transit, and new jobs and economic development. Go now to bettersaferroads.com, because all roads lead home.
No potholes, no bridges with holes. people wanted to know, what does this mean to me? How will this cost? What will this cost me? And the bottom line was, we broke it down to a weekly cost of, in the first year, 70 cents a week, and then $2.54 a week, and $10 a month. And by the way, we polled that. We went out and we polled, how much are you willing to spend? How much are you willing to pay for safer highways? Not do you want your gas tax raised, not do you want to pay a sales tax. We didn't talk about the tax mechanism. Just how much are you willing to pay? And the answer was about $10 a month. Okay, so the plan basically got us there. So, for the last half hour, I led you to believe that this was all smooth and it went well and we had no problems and it was according to Boyle. Not exactly. You have to be prepared for the long haul. And when I say combating member fatigue, we went through this time and time again, where we stops and starts. We actually had one of our champions die in the middle of this campaign, a House transportation chair. We had retirements of political leaders that were helpful to us. We had short-term fixes that were thrown at us, and political fireballs that interjected. In 2012, an entire year after we had planned to have this bill passed, this is where we were. The governor was still stalled. He wasn't sure whether he wanted to do this or not. He was trying to position himself for re-election as a jobs creator, and his closest advisors were telling him, this is a tax, you don't want to touch it. And they were, because his lobbyists only talked to the conservatives in the House, they didn't talk to anybody else. They were coming back to the governor's office and saying there's no support for this in the General Assembly. So it was quite a difficult situation. But who knows the next line from the movie? Anybody over 50 knows this. Nothing's over until we say it's over. So we stuck with it. We said, okay, what are we going to do? We got to keep our people. We got to keep everybody energized. So, because really where we were at this point was, okay, we have no bill. We're here and we have no bill. So what? So what we started to do was talk about the number of appearances. Okay, how many letters did the editor got in? How many talking head show appearances did we have? How many come up with new metrics and others? We rolled out a whole new cadre of spokespeople just to freshen it up a little bit, so we'd have new people instead of the same old ladies and gentlemen talking. Again, I think the keys were the chambers of commerce, getting other coalition members out, etc. Monthly coalition meetings, frequent meetings of key leaders to ensure messaging continues, rally the troops, etc., etc. It can go long. Seize every opportunity. Finally, when I started, I told you about June 30th, 2013, when we still hadn't had a bill. Over the summertime, we finally got a break that we needed, the opportunity. I told you one of our political champions died. Fortunately, I guess, not for him, and really not for us. Fortunately, someone else from the House stepped up, and he was willing to leave. His name was Nick McCosey. Nick was from Delaware County, Pennsylvania. And when the final bill passed, he couldn't really give you one detail of the bill. In fact, when he stood on the House floor during the debate, he had his aide next to him, and every time somebody asked him a question in the debate, he'd go, and then he'd answer. But Nick knew something needed to be done, and he knew how to get votes done. So we were able to finally move the needle in fall of 2013. And this is a picture of the bill signing. $2.5 billion increase in transportation funding in Pennsylvania. An increase in our gas tax, where our current gas tax at the time was 31 cents a gallon. We increased it to an equivalent of 28 cents. the Senate Transportation Chairs, Republican and Democrat, and the governor in the middle. The gentleman with the sunglasses is president of our Association of Contractors. This was taken outside of State College, Pennsylvania, at a point where a major project was going to take place. I'm going to talk just a little bit about what we did after the bill was passed, and then I'm going to wrap up. We passed the bill and was signed in 2013, December. We spent the entire year of 2014. We spent as much money messaging as we had annually during the campaign. Why? Because it was an election year, and it was vital that nobody who voted for the gas tax bill lose an election. And some were challenged. So we spent the entire 2014, while the contractors were paving every road in the state because there were a lot of commitments made, we were holding more rallies, we were raising PAC money, we were doing everything because we could not afford to have any members of the legislature lose and have the next go around be, oh look, these guys voted for that and they got thrown out. So we couldn't let that happen. And one of the ways that we decided was then in 2015, after that effort, we were successful. We had 98% of our members were returned. I think one senator lost who voted for the gas tax. The other two House members from Philadelphia were indicted for corruption and they were sent to jail. So we don't count that as a loss. Having nothing to do with us, by the way. So we started another findings project because we needed to figure out, okay, we want to fully explore how the public feels. Okay, now we passed this gas tax, and there's road work going on. How do you feel about it? So we wanted to understand how they felt about it. And also so we could create another messaging platform to make sure that, going forward, if somebody decided this is a good idea to repeal this bill, we would have good information and good public support on our side. So we did another study in 2015. And here are the key findings of that. Safety is still a basic value. Interestingly enough, and we're doing this now as a contractors association, we're working with PennDOT to make our work zones more user-friendly. What we found in our public messaging research this go around was that people, they don't feel good about being in a highway work zone. It's dangerous. They don't like what's going on in there. And sometimes it's hard to understand. And we all deal with the manual uniform traffic control devices, and we try to do what we can there, but I think we need to do a better job. We do in Pennsylvania, so we are. Time and information are very important, so we're working with PennDOT's people on that. Bridges seem to still be iconic, so anything that we can message on how we're fixing bridges and making sure that they're safe. For some reason that plays better in 2015, 2016 than it did in 2008, so we're featuring that. And then finally, I think the thing that was really interesting to us is the public doesn't want to know what you're planning to do 5 years from now. They want to know what you're doing now and what you've done. So we toned down on the 12-year plan, we're going to do this type stuff, and we focused more on some things that are going on. Here are some concept media that we have for billboards. Again, real-time information there. And again, more concept media on use of the internet, use of the social media, that sort of thing. PennDOT's doing a really good job working. They have a partnership with Waze now for real-time traffic information, and we think that that'll go a long way. So, in summary, what we did was we asked ourselves whether we were ready for success, could we attract others, and were we ready for the long haul. I told you at the beginning this was a 3-year project, 2008 to 2011. It ended up being a 5-year project. So we were there for the long haul. We exhausted almost all the money that we had, but we got it done. Final lessons learned, and I would say a couple of things that I want to leave you with here is managing your advocates' expectations is very key, and it's very difficult sometimes when it seems to be dragging out. We We also, in Pennsylvania, it worked for us to have a Big Tent. It was very effective for us to have some of what we call the non-traditionals there to prove the issue is bigger than our industry. And the final thing is support your friends, win or lose. You really have to stick with with the people that help you out in this. That's it. We had a very successful campaign. We had a lot of bumps in the road. We think we came up with some new messaging that worked for us, and hopefully I've presented you with some ideas today that will be of value to you going forward. Thanks very much. Okay, one in the back.
Yeah, I've got a question. It seems like it's a real fine line between that positive message that you shifted to versus the sky is falling. Can you maybe elaborate a little more on that? How not to necessarily give them a level of comfort to say, okay, things are fine, we actually need to act?
Well, yeah, I see what you mean. What we were aiming at there was we need to raise our investment in infrastructure so that things can be more safe in your community. As opposed to, we need to raise more money in infrastructure because we've let our system fall apart. So it was, what is the end, we were trying to get to is, what is the end result here? The end result is a safer system, less stress for you, and this is why it should mean something to you. And those were the messages that resonated. Now, one of the things we did, we had to go back and forth a little bit on some of this policy stuff. So, like that chart that I showed, the $1 million a day. We had a set of, we had very specific information, and then PennDOT and the administration was very helpful on this, on those policy issues, because you had to give some of that stuff, particularly to policy people, the legislators, legislative staff, and some other activists. But in terms of the things that we put on the radio and the things that we put on cable TV, it was very much aimed at, hey, if this passes, life will be better in Pennsylvania. Hope that answers your question. Sir.
To your point here on your last slide, communicate, manage expectations carefully. I noted in the commercial that you showed, one of the promises, if you will, made is invest in transportation will reduce congestion. And I've seen this used in other places before. Gives more money, will reduce congestion. But as many people know, often when you invest in transportation, it increases demand, and congestion doesn't go away. You increase mobility, there's more people traveling, but congestion doesn't change. And so sometimes there's a backlash against it. Have you seen any of that in your case?
No, I get your point, but what we were looking at was a comprehensive bill, and so there was a component of public transit, which would, be an alternative to building out lanes. And congestion was an issue that really played in urban areas and trying to reduce congestion. So there's a multimodal strategy. There's how do you get around without a car. In some cases in Philadelphia, for example, we used our multimodal fund to build an extensive bike network there, which a lot of people do use in Philadelphia. It's one of the larger biking and walking areas in the country. The funding bill also provided about $500 million a year more for public transit and to upgrade their lines, and that was another congestion relieving strategy, along with some lane widening and so forth. So no, we've not seen any backlash against that. I mean, I can't say that I'm looking at you here 3 years later and saying we've already fixed congestion in Philadelphia. No, we haven't, but we do have some strategies that take all those into account that we're working on, and it seems to be popular what we're doing.
Do you know the congestion go down? Not going to be
Well, we haven't quite finished some of the projects yet, but we have I-95. We have 21 miles of I-95 that runs right through the city of Philadelphia. Those projects are extremely expensive. I mean, we're talking about 1.5 mile projects at about $100 million of say that we're done with that yet. So no, I've not seen the difference in congestion yet. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm very interested in your multimodal strategy. We are in a slightly different party here in Minnesota because one of the political parties has sort of taken on light rail as being a wedge issue, and we don't have a mature legacy transit system that, say, Philadelphia and Harrisburg has. So I guess my question is, as somebody who's really invested in the bike, walk, and adoption, like how can we actually have cohesion around that, especially given the results of the election that really flipped our House and Senate Republicans? Like, is that going to just get left behind, and can we actually have this comprehensive strategy work here?
Well, I think you answered your own question. I don't know that I can answer it, but I think what you need to do is, going back to one of my slides, is we looked at, again, assess your politics. Where are things? For us, in 2008, 2009, we knew we could build a good network of support in which all of those components, let's face it, it's all advocates. So there's bike and pedestrian advocates. There was a group up there that, I don't know if you caught this on that one slide with all mission readiness. Has anybody heard of mission readiness? Yeah, great.
In the military.
In the military, yeah. Mission readiness is retired generals who are concerned with the physical fitness or lack thereof of America's youth and their ability to serve in the military because of an auto-centric society and other factors as well. So they were very much involved in that alternative transportation piece of it. And I think one of our successes was that we had various pots of money that were dedicated to each one of those programs. So we didn't set up a situation where we were cannibalizing each other, or hey, there's too much in this for transit, or there's not enough. I mean, there was a goodly amount of money for everybody was satisfied with their piece of the program, let's put it that way. And the key was, once we all agreed on the ask, we said, nobody gets left behind. In other words, when somebody comes to us and says, here's a deal, get rid of the bike pass. No, they're a part of this. Get rid of the transit. No, they're a part of it. And honestly, the politics of the vote count of it, you couldn't pass one without the other. You needed a coalition of urban legislators who wanted the funding for transit and alternatives to work with rural legislators who wanted roads fixed. And there weren't enough votes to do one or the other. It had to be all. But I guess one of the key messages I would really like to leave with you is we did some things that I think may be of interest to you here in Minnesota, but really Minnesota's Minnesota, it's not Pennsylvania. But I really urge groups to really take a step back, look at some of these things, and see whether a longer term strategy is better than a shorter term strategy. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. It's go time, in 2017. But like I said, in 2008 we looked at it and we said, we don't have a chance. It's just not going to happen before, Rendell isn't going to get it done. The legislature isn't going to work with him, and that's why we put together a 3-year strategy. Yes, sir.
What was the annual outlay for this campaign, and where did the money come from? Looks like it's got a fair amount of money.
Well, that's a good question. It was actually fairly austere. We spent about $1 million a year over the first 3 years, and about $600,000 in the last 2 years. It mostly came from Contractors Association. They funded the run of the bill. Contractors Associations and also design firms. It was the industry that financed it. That's just the way it worked in Pennsylvania. Other states I've seen have a much broader fundraising capacity, but it's really the companies that are driving it. Now, going forward, our challenges, we're already into the next challenge in Pennsylvania, which is in 3 to 5 years, where a portion of this Act 89 that we call it runs out of money, and that's more transit focused. So it's interestingly enough, our coalition is still together today. It still meets on a monthly basis almost, have a bank account. It doesn't have a 501c. It's not a taxable entity. It's just there. It's funded out of the Pennsylvania Contractors Association's advocacy fund. However, we are looking at possibly now making a change there because we're going to have a more transit-centric issue going forward. And some of the transit agencies are now looking at putting some of their lobbying dollars into our effort and stepping up a little bit more. Margaret?
Your gas tax increase, it was a little different. I think it was some sort of franchise fee or some cap that.
Up until the bill passed, we had a hybrid system. We had a cents per gallon fee at the pump, and then we had what we call the oil company franchise tax, which is basically a percentage tax against a millage, and that was applied at the rack or the terminal. We dropped the cents per gallon completely, moved all of it up to the rack, and so it's now all under the oil company franchise tax. What we did was, and we stepped that up over a 5-year period, so we raised that oil company franchise tax a little bit the first year, and then gave a break in the middle year, which coincidentally happened to be an election year. And then, so we were raising it on the odd years, the non-election years. The last step up is January of 2017, and we have a floor on that, which was pretty good thinking. It's based on the wholesale price of gasoline, and the floor is at $2.99. So obviously the wholesale price is below $2.99, but we're still at our floor. If gasoline should ever go up above that again, then it would rise. So it's basically that. And the other thing we've seen is that between the rack and between the retail price, there's some market absorption. So there's not a dollar-to-dollar trade-off on the price of filling up at the pump.
And has there been much of any kind of backlash from the public in terms of fuel prices?
No, I mean, if you go on, our newspapers are online. There's a cadre of people that have comments on every article, let's say, and those people don't like anything. I think, there are a lot of them are the hide in the basement guys that just don't like anything. You get a certain amount of that, but no, I mean, real true backlash at the public level, no, not at all. I mean, I think we messaged it well enough. I think that that we see work that's going on out there. Our messaging struggle going forward is getting the department to be a little more proactive on messaging the benefits of projects in their area, as opposed to there'll be a lane closure on Route 322, expect delays. So this is the kind of thing that we're working with them on. I showed, some of the concept media slides that I showed at the back, and they're very enthusiastic to kind of change their culture of thinking there. We've had a couple of major projects in sort of our urban areas. One very major high-focus project in the Harrisburg area was a rock slide project, and we had to shut a road down. It was projected to be shut down for 4 months, and there were businesses that were impacted by that. The contractor came in, knocked it out in 2.5 months. There was a lot of publicity, a lot of pictures of what was going on. I mean, it was a very specialized job. There were, men hanging off of cliffs and, and helicopters bringing things in and out. And so telling that kind of story, and we had another bridge in the Harrisburg area where we used that roll on, construct the deck over here and roll it on over a weekend. We've used some innovative techniques, and I think that's gone a long way to acceptance from the public. They said, hey, they're trying to do these things. They're knocking these things out quickly. They're not dragging them out. So, they see the value. Sir?
Robert, the people you talked about that are against everything, we have a term for them here in Minnesota, and it's called pay people against virtually everything. So you're going to take that back to Pennsylvania.
Thanks. We have the same thing, only we call it CAVE, and that's citizens against It's virtually everything, the same thing, yeah.
And then the other thing I had for you, I was driving through rural Pennsylvania, northwestern, right after your initiative and passing, and I saw an old handmade sign that said SOB. It said, "Save our bridges." So I just wondered if that mantra carried across the state, or you just hadn't heard about that. It seemed from your presentation that talking about bridges is a good thing.
Yeah, no, that's a new one on me. That might have been just a local initiative. But yeah, one of the things the department is messaging is the number of SD bridges that are going down and the safety aspect of bridges. And again, that was not something that really played in leading up to the bill. But it seems like since that, our research shows that that's something that now people are interested in. How are you doing with bridges? Okay, so this is why we did that post-bill messaging research, because we didn't want to just assume that the same things that we were talking about before or something were posted. One more question?
I may have missed it, but what was the funding mechanism for the transit component of the bill?
A percentage of the sales tax, the state sales tax. Not an increase in the sales tax, but simply a percentage of it.
Changing the color of money.
Right.
So that came out of the general fund then, or what?
Yeah, that came out of the general fund. Now, there's another component of that, I guess I could touch on, this is our future challenge. I mentioned earlier during the Rendell administration, there was a bonding scheme. Well, that involved the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission selling bonds that were toll financed bonds, and that money was going into PennDOT and some into transit. In Act 89, that transit portion of that bond financing scheme continued, but it had a 10-year sunset. So in 2023, that goes away. Poof. And actually, we're trying to solve that more quickly, because now the Turnpike's saying we can't keep up with our capital programs since we're selling bonds to pay for public transit here. So that is our next challenge, is fixing that little glitch in that thing. That was something that we had to have in there just to get everybody up to get the votes. So it was sales tax and bonding, and that's our next bill that we're working on now. Okay, thanks.